G'day everyone, Dominic here again from Gimble Productions, and today I just wanted to showcase the original Blackmagic Cinema Camera. Now on this channel I like to make videos about the Pocket Cinema Camera series, but for today's video I thought it might be worthwhile to have a look back into the past, back to 2012, and to see how this camera may hold up in the year 2021. I'm making this video just to point out some flaws or imperfections, but also things you need to consider if you want to use this in your current day-to-day filmmaking. Being the brand's first ever camera release, there were some design choices that were later improved upon in later camera releases. The first one may be the lack of electronic lens mount on the Micro Four Thirds version of this camera, which is the one that I have. To overcome this, I have to use a Micro Four Thirds speed booster by Metabones. This allows me to use a 5V battery pack in order to power my lenses. So this is crucial if you have a lens that needs electronic connection to focus, to adjust the iris, or even to use internal stabilization. Now I'm using the Sigma 18-35, which doesn't require electronic power to focus. However, if I want to adjust the iris, I have to use the Metabones speed booster to change the iris by using the jog wheel on the side. If you're adapting lenses, this is something to be aware of. On the left side of the camera, you do have a remote port for wired triggering, you do have a headphone jack, two audio TRS inputs, a professional SDI out for monitoring, a Thunderbolt port, and also a DC barrel port. So this camera does have an internal battery, but I end up using a BPU30 battery with a Sony battery plate and using a right angle cable, so that way I can mount the battery on top. If this battery dies, the internal one holds on long enough that I can hot swap it without having to turn off the camera. On the right side of the camera, there is a slot for a 2.5-inch SSD for your media recording. There's also a USB port for firmware updates, but there hasn't been one in a while. The front and back of this camera is covered in a rubber material which captures dust quite easily. The screen size is quite good, I'd say comparable to that of the 4K and 6K pocket cameras, though it does capture a reflection of glare quite easily. Underneath the screen you do have your media playback options and record options, and on the screen it shows you your media recording settings. To counteract the screen glare that I just mentioned, I am using a BM5 LCD viewfinder by Kinotenic, which fits the screen quite perfectly. It was made for the Pocket 4K and 6K cameras, but it does work well on this camera. You could use an external monitor for this, although the camera is quite heavy as it is. So this viewfinder comes in handy if you want to focus in the sun or to see your footage played back under bright conditions. Diving now into the menu, you have 6 options that you're presented with. On the bottom left, you have focus peaking, which you can turn on and off. This shows up as green dots in your footage. You have audio meters for audio monitoring, as well as adjustable frame guides. On the top left, you can alter the metadata for your footage. You can input the project name, the reel number, scene number, shot number, take number, and the angle of the camera. You can also input comments, which allows you to find your footage later if you're using DaVinci Resolve. Going now into the settings tab, you'll be able to adjust the camera ID, so the name of the camera. I like to rename my camera every project that I'm working on, that way it seems to help me find the footage later on in post. You can also adjust the date and time inside the camera, and you'll find yourself doing this quite a lot. Honestly, almost every time I've booted up this camera, the date and time changes, so something to be aware of if you're shooting footage across multiple days. I believe the native ISO for this camera is 800, but there's also 200, 400 and 1600 ISO options. You can also adjust your white balance here, but you're not able to see your footage at the same time, which makes it a bit tricky sometimes. You can also adjust your shutter angle, which goes all the way up to 360 degrees. Going now into the audio options, you can adjust your microphone input levels. You can also adjust your channel 1 and channel 2 input levels independently from each other. The camera does feature an internal microphone, but it is quite bad. Have a listen. Thankfully, on the left side of the camera, you do have those previously mentioned TRS inputs. Using an adapter cable, you can adapt any 3.5mm microphone, like my Rode Wireless Go 2.
This is just a quick test using the Rode Wireless Go 2 straight into the Blackmagic Cinema Camera. Now, this isn't the most reliable internal audio recorder. I wouldn't trust using the camera for my audio recording, but using a splitter, perhaps it would be good to record a scratch track into the camera, but also use a external recording device, and that way you can sync it up in post.
Going now into the recording settings, you can adjust the recording format that suits your needs. I like to stick to the 2.5K Cinema D&G recording, but there are a number of ProRes and DNx HD options to choose from. You can adjust your dynamic range from film to video. You can also adjust your frame rate as well, which goes up to 30 frames per second, so this is not a high-speed camera. You can also adjust your time-lapse interval, going all the way up to 10 minutes. Finally, in the display settings, you can adjust the dynamic range of your display. You can also adjust the brightness. You can also adjust the intensity of your zebra levels. I keep it on 100 so I know when it's truly clipped. You can also adjust your frame guides to whatever aspect ratio that you like. It's not ingrained into your footage, but it just helps you monitor that when you're recording. And lastly, just for monitoring, you can turn off your LCD or SDI overlays. That pretty much wraps up all the settings, so let's take a look at how the footage actually looks.
Told me, they say, no, you look very young. I said, well, I feel so young and I feel all right now. So, I'm happy.
At the start of this video, I said I wanted to point out some of the design elements or the imperfections that may make this camera difficult to use in your current day-to-day filmmaking. I would say that this camera is not for everyone, but that depends on your needs. This is not a camera that you can adjust settings on the fly like the Pocket 4K, 6K or 6K Pro cameras. So I would say there's a bit of an operational learning curve that you'll have to overcome to make the best out of this camera. Admittedly, ever since I got my 4K and 6K Pro Pocket cameras, I haven't used this camera as much as I used to, but when I do, I absolutely marvel at the footage that comes out of this camera. It's almost hard to believe that this camera was released almost a decade ago. And I would say the cinematic and filmic-like image that comes out of this camera is far superior than that can be created in the 4K or 6K Pocket cameras. Although that's my own opinion, this is definitely one of the reasons why people still love this camera so many years later. For anyone that's considering purchasing this camera in 2021, as long as you're committed to putting in the time and effort required to get the best out of this camera, then there's no end to the possibilities that you can create by using it. It is a fantastic camera, despite some quirks. But then again, almost every camera has those. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.